don't get ahead of your skis. Don't think your idea is so great that you're going to bet the farm on it. First of all, you need to make sure that your business model is solid. And the best way to do that is to try it out in a small scale. You find a small venue, like a restaurant or any kind of a franchise. You build one and make sure that it works. And I don't mean just hope it works. Run the numbers, like I did with that first gift shop. I knew how much my CDs cost. I knew how many she sold and how much I sold them to her for, and I knew what my net profit was. Bingo. It's hard numbers. You can't argue with them. So make your model, make sure it works, and once you've got a working model, then you can go as hard as you can run with it. And
This is Devin Miller here with another episode of The Inventive Journey. I'm your host, Devin Miller, the serial entrepreneur that's grown several startups into 7- and 8-figure businesses, as well as the founder and CEO of Miller IP Law, where he helps startups and small businesses with their patents and trademarks. If you ever need help with yours, just go to strategymeeting.com, grab some time with us to chat. We're always here to help. Now, today we've got another great guest on the podcast, Dave Combs. And Dave came from a small town in East Tennessee and grew up in a musical family and did some things with his church with music. Hung out with a lot of other people that like music as well. Became a director of the church choir while I was in college. Got a degree in college for math and physics. I think math major and a physics minor. Wrote a song in 1981 called Rachel's Song that caught a few people's attention. Wrote a ton more songs, music books, and other music related things. In 92 did music full time. Took a break from about 2001 to 2007, and was I think chief information officer in Washington D.C. Went after 2007, went back to music and semi-retired, and then 2013 or 14 worked with his wife his wife worked with some comptroller jobs in North Carolina, and he's continued to pursue a lot of the musical aspects alongside of that. So with that much as introduction, welcome on the podcast, Dave.
Thank you, Devin. I'm glad to be here. That was I think you covered all the bases there. It took me way back.
Awesome. Well, I always condense a much longer journey into the 30-second version of it. So let's unpack that a bit. So tell us a little bit about growing up in East Tennessee with a musical family and growing up doing church music.
Well, I was fortunately to be born into a family where my mother and my father and my grandmother and a lot of aunts and uncles and cousins all played music. Down here in East Tennessee, I think as being a Tennessean, one of the requirements to be a Tennessean is that you have to play a musical instrument of some kind, I believe. So anyway, I grew up around music. I loved music. My father, he played the piano by ear. He just would sit down at the piano and just start playing. Now, my mother, she could read music. She took lessons when she was a little girl. But my grandma Combs, she was only 4'8", but she could really sing and play. She played an old instrument called the auto harp, which some of your listeners may be familiar with. It's just a stringed instrument that plays beautiful chords. And she played an old organ back before they even had electricity. They had a pump organ that you pumped by your feet. You pumped the bellows that pushed the air through the organ. So she would play the old pump organ and sing solos in her little country church. And so I grew up around music, and I guess it's kind of in my bones, in my DNA. And when I went to college, I kept up my music. I was working my way partly through college as a part-time minister of music at my home church, and I also worked in the computer center at college. So when I graduated, I went to work for a company called Western Electric back then, which became later on AT&T. And that my job was, I'm a computer geek. I'm a computer programmer by trade, and so IT has been my background. But all that time, though, I never gave up my music. So it's like a hobby of yours when you have something you enjoy, whether it's playing golf or whatever it is, out of work hours, you like to do your hobby. So I did my music all through my early working years. And as you said, I wrote a song in 1981 that changed my life. It was a tune that didn't even have a name to start with, called Rachel's Song. And 2 years later, it got its name, Rachel's Song, from naming it after our godchild, Rachel. And then it got recorded in 1986 and got on radio stations all over the country and even in Australia. And it just took off and it became popular. And then I started writing more songs, of course.
Now, one question, just as it taking off and you start to do more songs, is that because you mentioned at this time you'd got the math degree and the physics minor, and you were working full time, and this was almost the second time full-time job or side hustle, whatever you want to call it. So as things started to take off, did you decide that you were going to leave the other career and pursue this full time, or are you going to continue to juggle both of them, or kind of as you're trying to decide what to do, how did you make that balance?
Well, let me back up even way before I even wrote Rachel's song. I was very, had a desire to work for myself, to work, I'm an entrepreneur kind of at heart. And so I'd always been looking I sure wish there was a way I could make a living working for myself. Well, this song and my music kind of opened that door. But it wasn't until I saw the business potential for my music, that it really, really opened the door. Now, I have an MBA from Wake Forest University, so I'm a business-oriented person, and I know how to do analytics and analyze business models. And I just didn't, up until then, have a business model that would eventually allow me to have my freedom as an entrepreneur. And it was only until I got my music played in gift shops, which is another interesting story, that I was able to make that model work. Any product that you have that is going to be sold needs to be, first of all, seen by the buyer, hopefully experienced by the buyer so they know what you're talking about, or at least vicariously through some other person that's saying this is really a good product. And so you have to have a consumer, and then you have to have the availability of the product. Well, I had the product, my music. The problem was getting it out to all the people that I just knew would love it. I knew they loved it because I heard from them from the radio airplay. People would write me letters about my music. So I got it into gift shops, and eventually I got it into over 1,000 gift shops all over the country. And it was at that point where my income from my music, finally I could see that the business model worked. And it was, my income far exceeded what I was making at my other career, that I could say to my boss, it's been nice working with you, but I think I'll go do my own thing from now on. So it's a long journey, and you learn along the way of the do's and the don'ts and the trials and errors and whatever. But once you get your focus on what you want to do, and you know that it works on a small scale, you just multiply it like crazy and go for it.
Now, one question, because definitely I've been in gift shops, and you see the music, but it's not what I would put, quote unquote, the typical avenue that people would usually take to get their music out there. At least from my very narrower understanding is, you'd go to record labels, or you would go to, at that time, your CDs, your tapes, you'd sell them in music stores, or in those type of areas. And gift shops, doesn't it readily come to mind as the area where people would go to buy music. So what made you kind of choose that path as the initial entrance into, hey, we'll go to a lot of gift shops and this will be a good avenue to get my music out there?
Well, to start with, I was thinking exactly the way you were, the way you kind of go where normal things are sold. Back then, we used to have something called record stores. And some of those are actually coming back a little bit, certainly with the resurgence of some vinyl records. But still, back then, when you wanted music, you went to a record store. You wanted clothes, you went to the department store. You had your places to go. Well, I went to the music stores and approached them about carrying my music. And I was really naive. I thought they would just welcome me in open arms and say, oh, we're so glad to see you. We've been waiting for you to come in the door. Well, it did not work that way. They didn't know me. They had never heard of Dave Combs, and my instrumental music was so foreign to most of their ears. All they wanted was rock music or country music or something that's the popular, whatever is being played popularly on the radio. Well, they wouldn't give me the time of day. And so I was really disappointed. I didn't know where I was going to go. And it was only through the generosity and foresight of a lady that I worked with. She had a friend who owned a gift shop who she gave one of my CDs of Rachel's song to. And this lady played my music on the system in her gift shop. Now, the name of the gift shop was America. So she was playing John Philip Sousa, patriotic kind of music. And then in her CD changer, here comes my Rachel song, which is instrumental, soft, soothing music. Quite a contrast from the other. And she said later on, she told me that every time Rachel's song came on in her shop, all the customers in the store would stop and they'd go over to the counter and say, Jane, do you have any of that music that you're playing for sale? I want to take that home with me. Well, she didn't. And so she ended up calling me and saying, Dave, you got to sell me at wholesale some of these CDs so I can sell them to my customers. So I did. I said, okay, well, I'll bring you some. I boxed up a box of CDs, drove down to Old Town Alexandria where her shop was, took her a box of CDs. Well, I thought, well, this is great. About less than a week later, Jane calls me and says, Dave, all those are gone. You got to bring me some more. Okay. So I box up some more and go down to Old Town and take them to Jane. I made that trip every week for over a year. She sold thousands of CDs of Rachel's song through that one little gift shop just by playing it in there for her customers. Well, that was the business model the light bulb went off in my MBA mind. I said, okay, that's what I got to replicate. And so then is when I got busy finding other gift shops around the country that would play and sell my music, and eventually getting over 1,000 of them.
No, I think that is an interesting aspect of the journey, and certainly kind of fun to see how, there are always the traditional models, and, sometimes the traditional models work and are great, but oftentimes people are just trying to stick by the traditional model because that's what makes sense and that's what others have told them. And yet they close their mind or they don't explore other avenues. And yet if you're willing to, and you look for those opportunities, oftentimes it can present, different avenues within which to make your business or your idea successful. So I love hearing that. So now with that, so you say, okay, we start to sell to gift shops, they play the music, people like them, they want to, buy the music or be able to hear that or take that home type of a thing. And so it provides a great avenue and a great context. So I think then you took the next almost 20 years, and then after the break, it continued on, but you took 20 years to continue to be in the music industry, continue to put out songs and content and books and musical books and other things. And so what made you decide to, in 2001 or so, to take a break for about 5 or 6 years from the music industry and go do something else?
Well, it had to do with my wife. We've been married coming up on 52 years, and I've been very supportive of her career, and she has mine. And she is very much a smart lady and a very hardworking and a very much of a leader. And she got a call from the White House saying, we want you to come to Washington to work back then it was the Reagan administration, and they wanted her to be a really high-level official in the government in Washington. And so it was the trek when she went to Washington. This was her third appointment in Washington, third trip. She was in there in the early 80s. She was in there in the early 90s, and then come 2001, she got the phone call again saying, Linda, we know your reputation. You've been here twice already. Come on back. We need a chief financial officer, a CFO, for the EPA. Well, she got interviewed and took that job. Well, we had already been commuting back and forth many years before, and I didn't want to do that this time. So I said, okay, I'll put my music business not on hold, but I'm going to transfer it to a business partner so that I can free up my time. And I'm coming to Washington with you this time. So that's why for 5 years, Linda and I both left Winston-Salem where we lived, kept our house, but we moved to Washington to work. She went to work as the chief financial officer. And while she was there, my IT background, I became the chief information officer for the United States Department of Agriculture. So at least we could live together, be in the same town, and she'd go over to the White House to work. She ended up being the controller of the United States in the White House. So she'd go over to the White House to work, and I went to USDA to work, and then we'd come home in the evenings. So that was not a hiatus from the business. It was just a kind of a little sidetrack while we continued our public service. Both of us feel very strongly about public service and doing the right thing for our wonderful country and so forth. So We did that and we both came home in 2007 to pick back up and do the music from here, which obviously by then, as you know, had changed dramatically from physical product to streaming and downloads. Everything's digital. So now we're in the digital world of music. And fortunately, I jumped on every opportunity I could to put my music in the digital world. I got it on Pandora, Spotify, all of iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, iTunes, everywhere I could find. And it's there now. And so I'm really fortunate that you can find my music, Rachel's song, and all my other music in all of those venues.
No, and I think that, it's interesting that, hey, my wife has got this opportunity, it presents an opportunity for me. We're going to do that for a few years. We get to the end of that and you say, okay, I'm coming back now to the music industry, kind of picking up a bit where I left off, but hey, the industry has changed. And so I can either keep trying to do what I was doing before, but that's less likely to work because the industry is changed. Or I say, what's the new opportunity? So I think now you've come back around 2007. You now have, online streaming, downloading, all those things that pop back up. And so with that, how did you, if I remember our conversation a bit, you started to become an early adopter of online music and streaming and downloading and those type of things as an avenue to further reach your audience. Is that right?
That is exactly right. And I'm still working hard at that. And in that world, as you know, even with podcasts, there used to be just a few handful of podcasts. Well, I don't know how many there are now. You can probably tell me, but there are thousands and thousands of podcasts. There's thousands of downloads. Anybody with a computer and GarageBand on an Apple, they can record an album just as good as we used to record in a $1 million studio. So the world has changed. It's much more competitive. So there's a lot of additional out there, but there's also, Devin, a lot of noise that you have to break through. How do you distinguish yourself? I know you run into this all the time, is how do you distinguish your podcast from all the others? And mine, how do I get my music distinguished from all the other music that's out there? It is a daily, continuous challenge. And right now, I am really focused on trying to promote my new book, as you see here on to my left, Touched by the Music. So I'm trying to get the word out because my book is full of these stories that I've told some about here today. Those stories are in my book. And people that read it say, wow, I didn't know that about you. Well, I said, okay, I'm glad you read it. But getting the word out about my book and about my music through the podcasts and appearances on radio. I was on a radio show this morning and talking with people. It's just, you just have to work at it daily and keep at it with publicity. I'm not so much into advertising as I am into trying to go through getting the publicity out there and letting people know.
No, and I think that I like a lot of the approaches and that you've taken, even from one of, no matter what stage of life you're in, where you've gone, taking a break, coming back, really saying, where's the opportunity? How can I reach them? And how can I pivot and adjust? And, some people are going to say, well, I've been doing it for 20 years or 30 years or whatever, and it's worked so far. And yet I agree with you. There's a lot of noise out there and it continues to get noisier rather than quieter. And so you're definitely having to look and see what are the avenues that you can stand out. So I think that's a great approach. Well, now as we kind of, taking your journey, got to the present day and kind of where you're at today, always have two questions I love to ask at the end of each journey. So we'll jump to those now. So the first question I always ask is, along your journey, what was the worst business decision you ever made and what'd you learn from it?
Well, one of the craziest business decisions I made was when I thought I was going to sell my music on television in these scrolling ads like you see for Time Life or whatever, selling the variant so-and-so's music, and the titles scroll down the screen and the name of the popular artist is there. And I thought, wow, back then it was a brand new TV network called HGTV, Home and Garden Television, brand new network. They didn't have that many subscribers at the time, but I called them and I said, I think I want to produce one of those ads for my music. I can just see your audience is my audience. These people love my music. So I said, how much would it cost me? Well, let's see, I think we can do about maybe, I think it was 20 ads for like $13,000. To me, that was a lot of money. I didn't have $13,000 to just throw away. So I called HGTV. I drove over to Knoxville, Tennessee, where their headquarters were, visited with them, met the vice president. They were a really small company at that time. I met everybody and saw their facilities. And they said, oh, yeah, we'll do this. So long story short, they made me a beautiful ad that ran on TV. And I said, okay, here's my $13,000. I have no idea how it's going to do, but he said, the advertising guy said, here's what I'll do. He said, we haven't done this before either. He said, but if you'll share the data from your sales with me, so I'll have some feedback data on who bought it where, then I will run your ad until you are whole, until you get your $13,000 back. Now, you try that today, nobody's going to make that kind of deal. But it was a handshake. And back then, and maybe today still with some people, a handshake was as good as a signed contract. Well, he ran my ads, and I was prepared for the phones to ring off the hook. And the day it started, I had already made up order forms, a big stack of order forms, and I got an 800 number call center lined up, everything. Well, they ran the ad. Well, I found out, maybe 6 or 8 people called. They run it again. Well, maybe an 8 or 10 people call. And they kept running the ad. And finally, they ran out of all my 20 ads, and I hadn't probably sold, $300 or $400 worth of music. And I thought, oh man, I don't know what's going to happen. Well, I talked to the guy that shook my hand, and he said, don't worry about it, Dave. Said, what we'll do is we'll run your ad in all of the unsold ad slots, which they had late at night. And so I became the king of late night TV ads. You couldn't turn on HGTV night after midnight and not see a Dave Combs ad. And they had to run that ad for 6 years before I got all my money back. Now, but he did it. He ran it, and finally it was all over. But they were good for their word. But that's probably I don't know that it was the dumbest decision I ever made, because I learned more from that than I spent, I'm sure. But that was one of the funnier, quote, dumb decisions that I made in my life.
I like it. No, I on the other hand, you got 6 years of advertising. Probably everybody that's listening today would kill for that. Wouldn't definitely do that. So that is, but it is funny that it took 6 years and it was on a handshake and it all worked out. But that's an interesting, dumbest idea, so to speak, in quotes. Because it may not have been as dumb as you say, but that's great. Second question I always ask is, if you're talking now to someone that's just getting into a startup or a small business, what'd be the one piece of advice you'd give them?
The one piece of advice I get them is, don't get in the Olympic jargon, don't get ahead of your skis. Don't think your idea is so great that you're going to bet the farm on it. First of all, you need to make sure that your business model is solid. And the best way to do that is to try it out in a small scale. You find a small venue, like a restaurant or any kind of a franchise. You build one and make sure that it works. And I don't mean just hope it works. Run the numbers, like I did with that first gift shop. I knew how much my CDs cost. I knew how many she sold and how much I sold them to her for. And I knew what my net profit was. Bingo. It's hard numbers. You can't argue with them. So make your model, make sure it works. And once you've got a working model, then you can go as hard as you can run with it. And sometimes it will develop into a multi-million-dollar business. But they all start with a small germ of an idea and a business model that works. So that's my advice: is don't get ahead of your skis, but stay with your program that works and then duplicate the heck out of it.
No, and I think that there's a lot of that's a great piece of advice. A lot of times, you watch whether it's the online, late night shows, you watch the online, or you see YouTube videos or whatever, and it's always a get rich quick schemes. And it's, hey, if you just do some Facebook ads and you just do this marketing and do this thing or do this tip, sometimes it works and sometimes you get lucky and it just takes off. But more times than not, if you would start out small, kind of figure out the approach that works and what that looks like, and then start to ramp it up, you're going to have a much higher likelihood of success than this is trying one thing, dumping it all in without even knowing if it's going to work or not. And I think that that's a great takeaway of starting small. So I think that there's a lot of wisdom to that. Well, as we wrap up the podcast, if people want to, first of all, get your music, they want to be a customer, they want to be a client, they want to be an employee or going and selling your music. If you do that, they want to be an investor in all of your upcoming things, they want to be your next best friend, any or all of the above, what's the best way to reach out to you, contact you, or find out more?
Well, they can find all of my music and, of course, my book. By the simplest way is just to go straight to my website, which is Combs Music, COMBS music.com. And on the first page, you'll see my book over on the left and my CD of Rachel's song. You'll see this. Whoops, that's the back of it. This is the front. You'll see this on the right of my website. And you can click the links there and you can find my music. Go to Amazon.com to get my book, or my book is actually available anywhere books are sold, whether it's any bookstore. So you can go to simplest thing, go to combsmusic.com and check me out. And also my email address, if you want to communicate directly with me, is dave@combsmusic.com. Very simple. Just my name, dave@combsmusic.com. I read them all and I answer them all. And I love to hear from people. And, my book is full of stories, and many of those stories came from people just like the people who are listening to this today.
Awesome. Well, I think that's definitely great ways to connect. Definitely plenty of information and things that people can check out, and certainly invite everybody to do so. Well, as we wrap up this episode, thank you again, Dave, for coming on the podcast. It's been fun. It's been a pleasure. Now, for all of you that are listeners, if you have your own journey to tell and you'd like to be a guest on the podcast, we'd love to have you. Just go to inventiveguest.com, apply to be on the show. A couple more things as a listener, make sure to click subscribe, share, leave us a review, because we want to make sure that everyone finds out about all these awesome episodes. And last but not least, if you ever need help with your patents, your trademarks, or anything else with your startup or small business, just go to strategymeeting.com, grab some time with us to chat. Thank you again, Dave, for coming on, and wish the next leg of your journey even better than the last.
Well, thank you, Devin. It's been my pleasure.